Stage 2, Week 2, finally done. Here we are. It's 5:40 in the morning. Got some coffee. Join me as we talk about some games, and we just kind of talk about everything Overwatch League related as it pertains to last week and, what possibly could be coming in the future. So cheers, and I hope you guys have a good morning. I will say, to lead off the show, little housekeeping. I have had some requests to have these more long form kind of stream of consciousness videos uploaded to Anchor as a part of my podcast. So if you would be interested in some like throwaway episodes on the podcast that are just kind of, easier to access, YouTube maybe doesn't load on your car or whatever, I don't know. Let me know. I've had some people reach out, just kind of gauging the ground. If you would be interested in that, I would love to be more accommodating to you, and let me know. But let's take a look at last week's matches. All in all, not too surprising. A couple matches that stuck out. Obviously, the Hangzhou Spark surprising everybody and taking the match over Boston. I think that definitely hurt the pick'ems out there. I think people were pretty shocked. I was pretty surprised after doing that pretty long and extensive video on how the Spark had some, positives. I think their planning was okay. Their execution was poor. Now it seems like the Spark maybe have broken that mold. They've kind of superseded the peak, I would imagine. Pushed past, conquered the demons. Who knows? They looked better against Boston, and Boston is a damn good team in this meta. So not a bad win. Not a bad win at all for the Spark, especially. They're kind of been struggling. This meta could have been, and still could be, a meta that suits them more. With the ability to run multi-DPS compositions, the map pool a little bit, allows for it a little bit more. We could see them do a little bit better. We'll have to see on that. The Valiant taking their first win over the Atlanta Reign, pretty surprising. I still think, well, no, at the time, I don't think anymore. I think Atlanta's definitely checked out. Things are going pretty poorly for them with this whole shifting of calling structures, bringing Baby Bay in. I definitely think that the move to Baby Bay calling, I would imagine, again, speculation on my behalf, is a good choice. He's not fit for this meta. They have to learn to play around and with him, which, we're seeing slight improvements. Fried has been very hit or miss. Not been my favorite diva in the league so far. Dako is MIA. Nobody knows what's going on there. Atlanta seems to be in a bit of a slump, I would say. It's not looking good, and I don't see them really coming back this season. Get a very Guangzhou Charge feel from them, where you assume they were going to do okay at the very least, and things have been kind of falling a little bit flat. So congratulations to the Valiant, picking up the pieces there. Wouldn't be surprised to see them still make any moves, but that's another story for another time. That is another story for another time. Any other matches? We got to see Dallas, I will say. Dallas came out. I don't want to hear anything about that Toronto game. That Toronto game should have been a 4-0, and lo and behold, it was a 4-0. Toronto looked pretty not strong. Still trying to find their bearing with the roster shuffle in this meta. Things look weird for them. Not solid. As we go on in the later weeks, let's look at Toronto's actual schedule here. So next week they play San Francisco Shock. Good luck. Vancouver and Paris. Paris might be doable, but this is a rough stage. I think, I think they're trying to take that as much in stride as possible. So Toronto fans, I'll see you next stage for that one. Best of luck for you. But yeah, Dallas should have beaten Toronto pretty handedly, and they did. Now, against Paris, that's where I was a little bit wishy-washy. I wasn't necessarily too sure on what this Dallas Fuel team would look like coming into a team that has been fairly successful in this patch. This is a Paris Eternal squad that should have been super successful last stage in this 3-3 heavy GOATS meta, and really didn't meet expectations, but somehow are finding some success with multi-DPS compositions, integrating Danya in the roster, which has been a nice boon for them, integrating Gray, LH Cloudy, playing more to this kind of a little bit more passive, methodical style that they showed in Stage 1 without the players that are a little bit more aggressive, which felt like a stylistic mismatch, I would say. But all in all, a solid shout from them. Paris didn't look too terrible, I will say. They definitely put up a fight against Dallas. My thoughts on Dallas, which we'll get into later on in the show, kind of bland. Not very crazy. Nothing really sticks out. They've got some holes that I think definitely could be punished. And so far, again, very middle of the pack taste from them. Nothing too crazy. I do think a couple things go a little bit differently. Paris probably makes this a lot closer than it needs to be, especially, funnily enough, on Paris. I think they could have probably pulled that out as a win and drew it to game 5, and things could have been a little bit different. So definitely a closer match than I think people are giving them credit for. But all in all, week 2, pretty bland. Everything kind of went as expected, or as you would expect it. Is there anything else? Shanghai Chengdu was a little bit of a mix-up, but I think that was just a stylistic plus for Shanghai, plus the map pool was a little bit in their favor. Chengdu still trying to run this Symmetra leapfrog strategy on King's Row, which I like the creativity from Ray, but it's rigid. They don't want to swap off of it. You know, I don't know how strong. I don't think that Symmetra Assault's all that strong, so maybe after one push, again, it's a very slow pushing composition, so multiple pushes with this comp, it's going to eat at that time bank, and you see them really start to struggle on point A. Once they get through point A, which I think is what the strategy is necessarily kind of developed for, they start to do well in B and C, but A, which is usually seen as probably the easier point, seems to be their weak point, which is strange. I want to see a little bit more flexibility from them, or a little bit more proactivity if things aren't working. Make some change ups, because it's not doing good. It's not working out so great for them now that the strategy's out there in the open and people can study it a little bit more. But a couple big points to talk about. We have GOATs kind of coming back into vogue. We see a lot more 3-3 than we did in week 1. I think teams are, again, we're still pretty early in the stage, I will say. We're only going into week 3. GOATs is still something that people have been practicing all of stage 1, so it's very much a default composition, and this kind of goes into another point which we'll tie into. But I think the reason why GOATs is so prevalent is because it's been so practiced, and I think the map pool actually plays into it quite well. I think Control, for the most part, you can play, especially in Busan, especially on Oasis, you can play these multi-DPS compositions and get away with it. Assault, however, you're starting to see some different looks. You're starting to see teams like Paris and Dallas in last week's match push a little bit harder on the Bastion, especially on the Paris 2CP map. You're seeing that a lot more. You're seeing some different looks on Temple, but for the most part, the default go-to, if our weird kind of creative strategy doesn't work, is always back to GOATs. So it's just one game mode that feels very much in flux, kind of chaotic. You know, you have different strategies kind of popping out. And again, to even kind of cite the Dallas Fuel Paris game, if you look at their control maps, they roll out on a lot of DPS compositions and they're scouting, and then they go back and swap GOATs. So it's very much a comfort thing, at least in my opinion, that teams are going to be running this. But I don't think that the map pool helps either. GOATs is pretty good on most maps. Junkertown, however, once you start to get through A, I think then GOATs becomes popular, but A is a little bit Bastion-y, double sniper, things like that, which you should still see. But for the most part, GOATs is still super popular. I think that comes down to just experience in map pool for the most part. But it gets into a pretty interesting topic that kind of popped up last week. For those who are not, following as much news as possible, there was a bit of a kerfuffle on the old twitter.com between some casters and the Houston Outlaws for the most part, kind of talking about how they need to have a more, colorful style, or kind of have a more bold approach to the metagame, especially if you aren't going to be as strong as you could. I would say that, Houston, for the most part, at times look okay. I'll give them that much. That, at times they definitely don't look terrible, but then there are times that they just look abysmal. Things just kind of don't make much sense with them, and they fall flat on their face, and it doesn't look very good. Again, one moment that kind of really sticks out on me, I think last week, was it last week, or it might have been last stage? All I remember is on Busan, they're going for like an Earthshatter EMP play, and they botch it tremendously, and it's one of those things that I don't think you can botch. It's very difficult. It speaks more to what's going on within the team structure and the problems that they're having, and less about not how strong the team is, but you can see the problems there, right? I hope that makes sense. So this brings up a pretty big dilemma between, do you forfeit a lot of what you've practiced already throughout the season to kind of develop a new strategy to approach this patch? Or do you just rely on that experience to try and get you some fundamental wins versus teams that you really should be beating? As we go into some of the more interesting games coming into week 3, the Houston Outlaws play Shanghai Dragons, and depending on which school of thought they go with, could seriously dictate how the rest of their season goes. Monty actually made a fantastic video talking about this pretty in depth, which conceptually I agree with, but I think there's some pretty key points that I think, kind of thinking in the rationale of an actual team playing, an actual team trying to, facilitate any kind of change, especially within the season, within the stage, in like prime practice mode, if that makes sense. Like, you're actually playing and practicing, you're in the mix of the season, adrenaline's going, all that stuff. Trying to just change everything up on the fly isn't going to work, right? And when I say it's not going to work, it's not that it's not going to work in the long run, right? Conceptually, I agree with, yes, Houston needs to kind of find their style, find what they're good at, and lean into it, but also still have that fundamental kind of strength of whatever's good. We have a pretty good understanding of it, which, to be fair, to give credit to the Houston Outlaws, they do have a solid baseline understanding of what's kind of going on with this meta. But I think there's external factors that are hindering them, I would say, for the most part, which, again, we'll get into. So what do you do as a coach, as a GM? Do you kind of take two steps backwards to go forward, or do you just rely on that experience? And like I mentioned, if you're in the mix, if you're a player and things are going poorly, I can imagine that these players have a hard time buying into these crazy strategies, especially if they're not working at scrim. So you're already causing more discord in a team that looks like they're having a tough time internally, especially with all the strange roster moves that they've been doing. Subbing out Jake, subbing in Arhan. From my understanding, Jake's a pretty big part of the calling structure on that team, and that's a big hamstring that you're hitting the team with mid-stage. I think that's very important to kind of keep in mind when you look at this team and how much smoke is coming from House Outlaws, right? If we're moving people around that are vital to this team, and again, by no means do I think Jake is a outstanding player. I think he's serviceable at best, and for the most part has been pretty lackluster on Brigitte, getting caught out of position numerous times. Is Arhan the replacement? Mechanically speaking, possibly, right? Arhan, all in all, mechanically is a solid player. Decision-making wise, historically, been pretty poor. But the biggest kind of culprit here that I want you to focus on is Jake's leadership within that team, or at least that's the kind of narrative that's been pushed. Ripping him from that team and putting in a new calling structure, while it might be better in the long run, things are going to look choppy right now. Do you throw, with that in mind, right? You're ripping out a core key member of this team, and then you're putting a new strategy on top of it. Is that what you really want to do? That's going to take some time for the team to get used to it in practice. You're going to be losing a lot. Do you take the morale hit there? It is a give and take. It's not as easy as, oh, the Houston Outlaws need to have a better style. And by no means am I, prescribing that to what Monty's video is in summation. But I think more realistically, the morale of a team has to be taken into consideration a little bit more. And I think it's very difficult when you are trying to throw different looks at a team and allow them to kind of develop a strategy on their own, with the coaching staff and whatnot, not just the players. I don't want to say that at all, but allowing them to be a little bit more creative could be difficult, is going to be harder to have them buy into, things that you're going to create in the long run. I don't know how successful that is. When it comes to the Vancouver game, I think that's what a lot of people are going to kind of draw memories towards, or kind of tie this discussion together with. I don't agree with running Sombra on those maps. I think stylistically it's a bad choice against Vancouver. Not to be super long-winded about it, because I do kind of want to get on with the show here a little bit, but when you're running Sombra, especially with goats, you don't want to run it into a team that is going to play lights out 3-3. That's just going to run into you and play super aggro, especially when they know you're running Sombra. So stylistically, I think it's a poor matchup. I don't think it would have mattered either way. Could it have thrown them a different look? Possibly. I don't think that Vancouver has struggled against that particular variant of goats all that much. I think they've very much struggled against the massive shifts that Chengdu were able to do, if that makes sense. Chengdu came out, played some, multi-DPS compositions, took them off guard, took a couple maps, then swapped it to goats. As Vancouver was starting to get their bearings on their multi-DPS compositions, now they have to kind of readapt to how Chengdu plays goats and quickly flip through their Rolodex and remember what the game plan was against their goats composition, which, again, threw them for a loop. But again, they managed to kind of rally it back and do quite well. Is that something that the Houston Outlaws have the kind of pieces for? 100%. You can play a couple different lineups that I think would do quite well with multi-DPS. Is that what they're practicing behind the scenes to be successful throughout the entire stage? Probably not. I think it's difficult to say in terms of the stage overall that would be the most optimal way to practice. If we're talking about specifically beating Vancouver in, let's say, the playoffs, so the Houston Outlaws and the Vancouver Titans are meeting in the playoffs in a best of 5, do you then throw them a look? Do you then prepare within that week's time a multi-DPS composition? A change up with the goats? Do you kind of invest your resources, in a different area to kind of, pull pressure away, or, have a creative look on how you play goats? 100%. Is that good in terms of a successful stage overall? I don't think so. Again, I think it would be beautiful to see that against Vancouver in a vacuum. But again, we're in the regular season. It's not that simple, I would say. So again, having player morale kind of take a hit going backwards is a big deal. And I don't know that you'd be able to kind of recover from that, especially with a team that, by all accounts, is emotional. And that's not a bad thing, right? It just is. It's reality. I don't want to harp on the Jake punching of the desk, but this is a team that, in a way does want to win, but has a hard time finding those wins. So doing too many things at once could be detrimental. Not doing enough could be detrimental. What Houston's doing right now, again, I would agree. It isn't working, but is it now when you should be changing parts out and tuning the engine? I don't think so. I think you need to wait until the off season, or not wait until the off season, but like the middle part of the stage transition from stage 2 to stage 3, that kind of break that we have. I think that would be a better time to really start to get in and figure out, okay, we're going to be this wily team. We're going to take a page out of Chengdu. We're going to take a page out of Guangzhou. And we're going to play what we're good at, right? And we started to kind of see that in stage 1 a little bit, especially on control maps. They would play a lot of multi-DPS compositions. And had some varying degrees of success, but, well, I didn't break my pen, but snap that off. Oopsies. That's a little strange. But that's kind of the style versus experience discussion. I think it is a dilemma, but there is a little bit more nuance to it that I wanted to kind of talk about. Teams from this week that were interesting, I would say. Dallas, we got to see, again, first looks from Dallas. I wasn't super impressed. Note looks good on the team. Again, I've said it on multiple different shows now. I think the trade between RCK and Note was very much a lateral trade. I think both teams benefited from this. All in all, Note looks good on this team, 100%. Has some synergy there with OGE. They seem to play very well together. Who isn't playing well? I think Closer, especially in that Paris match, got picked off quite a bit. If you look at his time to charge first ultimate and his time to charge ultimate overall, just the amount of ult charge he gains comparatively to Cruz, hints at either a lot of deaths, some sort of passive playstyle. Overall, wasn't super thrilled with Dallas. I will say their Paris setup on... their Paris kind of bastion setup on the map, 2CP Paris. I know it's very confusing. I don't know why they would... Anywho, their setup was actually pretty interesting. I do want to kind of give them credit there. The coaching staff did a good job. I think that's probably where you're going to see more teams set up on the... if you're attacking, from the attacker's perspective, it's on the leftmost side on the high ground. It forces the Sombra to have... it restricts Sombra's movement, and that's kind of the way that teams are approaching this Bastion bunker strategy. Then they have OGE playing Winston, I think it was, and Note was on the Orisa. So you have a lot of spy checking. It's difficult for the Sombra to get in, and you're kind of just forced to run these dry fights over and over, which Paris did quite well. They knew they had to be really proactive to just get in there, do as much damage as possible, die quickly, reset, do it again, and just build up ultimates. But what ends up happening with that match is that they don't, especially when they go into the second round, they kind of, both teams kind of find these scrappy wins on point A and then do well on B. Paris on their attack seems to invest ultimates in a staggered fashion. So I believe it was Gray, Nanos, Cloudy before they have Nano Blade and EMP, but that's their big win condition, is they're just, saving ultimates to just all in this comp and just take the tick. And that's all they need, right? So they try to nano LH Cloudy, it doesn't work. Cloudy Primals, it doesn't work. And then they go for the Nano Blade EMP, that doesn't work. If you would have packed a harder punch on that second fight, I think that probably would have been a little bit more successful. But I think that's a little bit more reductionist. I'd have to go back and look at exactly what was going on. Generally speaking, I think that especially if you only need one tick, it's probably better just to save all your ultimates and just all in them there. But there could have been some forcing of, support ultimates that I might have missed. So Dallas overall, we'll see. We'll see. I think week 3 they have a little bit of a test. We'll get into it when we go into the predictions. But Hangzhou, the Spark, that big win over Boston, that upset. One of the better plays I've seen in a long time from IDK. Huge heads up play. I would definitely go back and look at, it was the Lijiang Gardens, I believe. I think it's one of the last fights. IDK kind of has the presence of mind to realize that the only way they're going to survive this is if somehow the enemy Graviton Surge is kind of negated or avoided at all costs. And he kind of positions himself on the flank, boops the Zarya off the map, and then comes back in and gets a frag for himself. Just a huge hero play. Again, to have the presence of mind in that moment is some MVP level stuff. And all in all, they look solid. I think this isn't going to be a huge, renaissance for the Spark, but all in all, seem to be doing okay for themselves in this patch. Still throwing some DPS looks out there. Against the Titans, they had some serious potential with multi-DPS compositions. In their more recent match, there was a little bit more focus on the 3-3, which, again, still kind of shows the same flaws, a lot of miscommunication, a lot of coordination errors. But in the most part, they've got a good win under their belt. Could morale kind of been boosted? going into week 3. Hopefully so, and we'll see this kind of stronger spark continue on forward. Chengdu, again, I mentioned it in the previous couple segments. They look very, very stubborn, trying to force the Symmetra strategy. I think it's fine to do that, but I think it's time to start peppering it in and not just forcing it as much, if that makes sense. You need to change it up a little bit more so people aren't expecting it. People already kind of have seen the strategy. They know what to prepare for. They've seen what works against it. They've seen what doesn't work against it. It's time to throw a different look at people. And if you don't have a different look, go back to the fundamentals. I don't think their GOATS was abysmal. I will say that it's not the best in the league. That's for damn sure. But they can play multi-DPS compositions. I believe Yang Xiaolong is in LA at this point. Could there be more experimentation with him? Who knows? Where's Jachirin? That's what I want to know. What happened? Where's he? I don't think it matters too much, but I'd like to see where or what the Chengdu Hunters look like with their full lineup. But stubborn looks overall. I agree with Benchmob. They do kind of look London-esque towards the end of Season 1, and they need to change up the strategies a little bit more. And the Seoul Dynasty, shifting gears. We still don't know what's going on with them once again. Is this what I kind of predicted all from the beginning of the season, where things are going bad internally and they're having to sub people out? I don't know. Have they just decided that this is the best roster that they can field with Jaehong and Fitz on Zarya? And Marvel playing main tank? Seems to me that that wouldn't be the case. Maybe they're having more success in practice over Fissure and Fleta and whatnot. It's difficult to say, but these change-ups in the middle of the stage, in the middle of the season, seem to me to be kind of smoke signals for something a little bit more sinister internally. I think, again, Houston Outlaws ripping Jake from the roster, putting in Arhan. We talked that one to death. Doing much in the same way for Seoul Dynasty. If Fissure is your kind of franchise player, right? And you remove him from the roster, what's going on internally that's making that a possibility? What's happening? Why was that the stance beforehand, and why is that not the stance now? Things are in a disarray there. There was another team, and I can't remember who it was. There's another team. Maybe it'll hit me. But Seoul just, I don't know what's going on with them. And going into week 3, they're going to have, as much as I said Dallas, they're going to have a test with Seoul. Seoul's going to have a test as well. Is this roster, is there internal dilemmas? Was this just kind of a meta game, give people plate time thing? I have no clue. To me, I would, from what I've predicted, I think I've put my opinion out there quite heavily on this team. I think this is the roster that they could have went with overall. I would like to see Fleta a little bit more. Jaehong hasn't looked terrible, especially with the heavily, I wouldn't say popularization, but the heavy use of Ana right now definitely plays into his wheelhouse. So I don't hate this roster overall, but why was it not used at the beginning of the season? Was there some sort of, visa dilemma? Were players not, performing up to par? Why wasn't that necessarily the case? Why is the control team playing full time now? It seems bizarre to me. And that's where I have my questions in the week 3 matches to look forward towards, especially leading into Dallas and Seoul, who play, let's find out. They play, what would that be? Saturday 3rd match. It's hard. This one's a toughie to call, I will say. I want to give this to Dallas. I think, if I had to guess, right? Pen to paper, gun to head. Seoul have internal issues going on. And again, just speculation on my behalf. Seoul have problems going on behind the scenes. It's going to be close. Dallas still kind of look flat, but I think the deficiencies in Seoul Dynasty's locker room are going to kind of hinder them quite a lot. I think they're scrambling to figure out how to solve them, and preparation is going to be pretty difficult. Do any of these teams have a double week? Okay, Dallas does have a double week. They do play Vancouver and Seoul. That is a little bit more interesting. And Seoul don't have to. They have a single week. This might be a Seoul. This one's actually pretty close, but all in all, I think I still have to say Dallas on this. I think in general, they have just a better GOATs, if that makes sense. And again, like I talked about, the multi-DPS compositions seem to be only finding success on, or with certain teams, and mostly on control. Can Seoul bring out the somber GOATs and have it find success? 100%, but is Marvel going to compete with Fissure with the mechanics at main tank? I don't know. Is Fitz a better Zarya than Fleta? I don't personally think so. I think Fleta, again, that's maybe I think that's just a little bit more bias on my behalf. I think Fleta's just really, really good. I think he's solid on the hero. I haven't seen too much in the way to suggest that he would be poor at it. But there again, I don't think I have enough info on Fitz to say otherwise, but just historically from the information that I have, I don't have a ton of info on Fitz, and I have a lot of info on Fleta. So again, I have to lean a little bit more that way. There again, Dallas does play 2 different games. I just don't see Seoul bringing it back in time to have them succeed. I think, if I had to guess, I think there's stuff going on behind the scenes with Seoul, and I have to give this to Dallas as much as I wasn't impressed by their Paris game. Let's check the maps. Maybe that'll... Lijiang, Hanamura, Eichenwald, Watchpoint, Gibraltar. I like Seoul's Watchpoint. I think, in general, I think they beat Gladiators. Yeah, they beat them on Watchpoint. They beat them on Oasis. I think this is going to be close. This is going to be a toughie to call. I think it's Dallas taking this in probably in game 5, if I had to guess. I think this is going to go the distance. But Seoul's going to be fielding the Marvel, Jaehong, Fitz roster. Stuff's going poor behind the scenes, and I think Dallas takes it 3-2. But it's close. Very close. Slugfest. Chengdu Gladiators. Another match that I think is going to be kind of interesting, important for especially Chengdu. A team that I, put a lot of stock into. I bought a lot of that hype juice, and not necessarily paying out for Chengdu as much as I'm a Chinese enthusiast. Kind of sad to see. I think they're going a little bit too creative. I think they're relying on specifically one creative style, very, very, leaning on it too much, I would say. And I would have to imagine that Glads are going to be able to beat it. I think the Gladiators have looked very solid overall. That said, there's only one map that kind of baits Chengdu into running that, and that is Hanamura. And that's where we saw it kind of first unveiled on A and B, where they kind of caught Paris off guard, and they would, do this Symmetra leapfrog strategy. They don't have to play King's Row. Actually, let me check before I make an oopsie. Chengdu Gladiators. So they play Busan. I think that's very much a Chengdu favored map. I think they're very comfortable playing multi-DPS compositions, and Busan, for the most part, has been very multi-DPS oriented. Can the Gladiators still beat them? 100%. I think this is just a Chengdu favored map, like 60-40 Busan, right? So I think there's still a good shout for Gladiators to win that map, but Chengdu favored. Hanamura, I think this is where Gladiators can come back. I think Chengdu, again, if I have a solid read on them, I think they're going to be very, very stubborn, be very rigid, try to force the Symmetra for 2 to 3 pushes, fail on their face, then they swap to like Widow, Pharah, Genji, something, Sombra, who knows. They attack point A, it fails, they get full held. Gladiators take that. I'd say 80-20, right? Eichenwald. Again, something that is going to be favored a little bit more to Chengdu. You can play multi-DPS compositions on defense with the Pharah, with the Sombra, kind of having a nano-boosted Pharah on defense and attack. Jinmu's been very successful with this. Are the Gladiators going to be prepared? I don't know. They have Florida on Thursday. They have 2 matches to prepare for. I would imagine that they're all inning Chengdu. You could see Gladiators take a little bit of a little heat against Florida because they're not preparing for them. I would, if I would, putting myself in the coach's shoes, I would imagine I'd be prepping very much for Chengdu here. Get a little coffee. Hopefully your coffee's not as cold as mine. And then we go to Junkertown. Again, I think this is a Chengdu map. Plays into their wheelhouse, yada yada. You hear, you get what I'm saying. The maps, I think, definitely don't favor Gladiators as much as they could. Now, if Eichenwalde was swapped out for King's Row, I would give Gladiators that map. Chengdu, again, looking very, very just forcing this strategy, forcing this Symmetra leapfrog stuff way too much. If it was King's Row, I'd say this would be a lot closer, but for the most part, I think this is, again, I have a lot of stock in Chengdu. I think Chengdu are going to do great this stage. This is their stage to do well. They have a very easy schedule. This is probably their last hard matchup, and for the most part, I think they coast from here on out. Week 4, I believe that's the Homestead, and they'll be playing against the Spark in London. London could be interesting. And then they finish out the stage against Valiant, which should be an easy Claparino. That said, Gladiators Chengdu, I have to give this Chengdu. I don't think the maps favor. They don't flavor Gladiators at all. I don't think Gladiators should be much of a flavor either way. But Chengdu maps aren't too much in the way of helping Gladiators, and I think this is just a very comfortable stage for them, but very comfortable patch. They can get away with a lot more, much more of the DPS antics, and they'll succeed, I think, here. And I think they're going to do just fine, especially seeing how Gladiators have to prep for 2 different matches. Not something you want to see. I'd say this is, again, 3-1 with Gladiators taking Hanamura. And then we have Houston Shanghai. And going back to the style experience matchup, this is where I think Houston are going to have to pick which one of those schools of thought they go into. Shanghai is not the best 3-3 team, but they're not terrible. I would say that they're pretty on par with Houston. So can Houston just stay with the 3-3 GOATs and do that very well? 100%. Are they going to prep for Shanghai relying on Sombra from Ding, I would imagine? Possibly. We could see some different looks from them. Do they go a little bit more creative and try to beat this team, much in the same way that a lot of people criticize them for not just beating Vancouver, if that makes sense, and kind of trying to prepare for them in a vacuum and not kind of think about the whole season or whole stage? Possibly. It's going to be a litmus test of how Houston is going to look for the rest of the season, and I don't think it's going to be very good. Again, they're one of those 3 teams, and I still haven't thought of that 3rd team. I really don't remember who it was. Maybe there wasn't one, and I'm just sleep deprived and coffee hyped up. I don't know. But ripping Jake out of this team, I think, is a pretty big cause for concern. I think making a calling structure change in the middle of a season is a very drastic move, and one that could save the life of your team, right? Like some crazy heart surgery stuff, but is going to take some time to recover from. I don't think this is going to be enough time to recover from it. Again, Arhan has just been kind of put into the team. I would imagine we're going to see him more in the Shanghai game. I don't think we'll see, if I had to guess, I don't think we'll see Jake play at all. I think Jake's probably taking a break, I would imagine. And I think that's because internally, Houston, I would imagine, are a mess. Having Flame come out and have this long tirade. When I post this this evening, He'll be on Oversight with Monty, Thorin, and Avast, talking about a lot of the things that I've touched on: style versus experience, the caster's role with, you know, criticism in players. I think his hour-long kind of speech and, you know, little soapbox moment on Avast stream says a lot about what's going on in Houston, and it's not good, right? Houston also has a double week. They have to prepare for Shanghai and Philly, both difficult matchups for them. So this is a fully loaded schedule for them. Two very different styles. Shanghai wants to kind of play into the multi-DPS. They don't hate playing 3-3, I would imagine. They can get away with it. I think they're much more a Sombra-focused team, and can Houston abuse that? I don't know. I really don't know. It's going to be a litmus test for them. Excuse me as I have coffee burps. Forgive me. The pains of trying to content create in the morning with some sort of weird esports soup schedule. But yeah, I don't see Houston taking this. Map wise, let's take a gander. Where are you? Houston, Shanghai. Oasis goes to Shanghai. Temple. I think Shanghai has also been one of those teams that's been utilizing a lot of the Junkrat on B and a little bit on A, but this also could play into Houston's wheelhouse if they decide to use it. Again, if they're going to kind of stick with their guns, granted, was that their guns or was it everybody else's kind of like take on the situation? I don't exactly remember. They could have success on Temple with the Junkrat and maybe putting in Jake, but again, if I have a read on this team, and I think I do, I don't think that's going to be the case. And I think Shanghai is gonna give them a rough time on Temple. I think they go up 2-0. Then halftime, yada yada. Blizzard World. I think maybe Houston has a chance on Junkertown. Blizzard World could be a toss-up, but then they go to Control again, and I think you could get Busan, you could get Lijiang. I don't see Shanghai losing this. I think all in all, a two-game week for Houston, especially with like two pretty difficult opponents, is going to be rough. Going to be very rough for them, and I don't see them doing well against Shanghai at all. I think this one's going to be pretty decisively Shanghai, if I had to guess. So yeah, for all you Winston Labbers out there, you might want to put a little bit of extra juice on this match. I think this is going to be very much a Shanghai win. But yeah, that's my week 2, stage 2, season 2 review. Lots of twos. Thanks for joining me. Sorry if it was a little rambly. And again, if you like the rambles, you like that stuff, and you want it on the podcast, let me know, and I can upload it over there as well. And do it that way. And again, if that's something you want, let me know. Any questions, again, feel free to leave them down below. If you think I'm stupid, feel free to leave it down below. We can either have a discussion, or you can just tell me I'm ugly. Either way, don't really care. Just leave them sweet YouTube comments for me. But until next time, guys, I appreciate you all for sticking through it this long. I realize this is a 43-minute video, and if you've listened to me ramble this long, I appreciate you. I love your face, and we'll see you next week.